Hello, self-starters, problem solvers, creative outside-the-box thinkers, and community builders. We need this like water. We need to gush, flow over dips and dives and thrive. We need patience, unconditional love, that authentic when you're down, we're still around type vibes. And you know that self-love should gush and flow over dips and dives. Thank you, young birds. I apologize. The older bird is here to help you realize your time to blossom, rise, revise, and then climb as high as the sky. Don't be shy. No time to compromise. Your anxious thoughts are just lies. With that poem, I'd like to introduce you to this podcast, specially made for positive impact ventures, helping you find your way through the external funding journey as a new entrepreneur or new nonprofit board member. Bird's Eye Impact, where positive ideas take flight. I am Dr. LaToya Hinton. I'm proudly neurodivergent and happy to spread positivity, optimism, and nourishment to advocates for positive change. I want to bring hope and encouragement to folks who are just starting out with their own business or just starting their journey in nonprofit management. I'm a grant writer, researcher, instructional designer, and data analyst. I'm the perfect matchmaker for strategic partnerships that sustain growth and resilience in trying times. Fish in a Tree empowers the neurodivergent community through activism and financial stability. Bird's Eye Impact, where positive ideas take flight. And this time around, I am here with Bridget Hamstead, and I would love to just start off introducing Bridget and her work with Fish in a Tree. Go ahead, Bridget. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the work that you're doing right now. And I guess we can just kind of go from there.
Sure. So I'm Bridget. I am the founding director of Fish in a Tree. We are the Center for Neurodiversity Education, Advocacy, and Activism. We were founded originally as a neurodiversity community center here in New Orleans, and we've since expanded and pivoted, and we're now a virtual hub for all of the infrastructure work to establish neurodiversity justice as a movement here in the U.S. I'm also the board chair of Neurodiversity Coalition of America, which again, their mission is to further neurodiversity justice here in the U.S. Some of our larger projects and initiatives involve the establishment of neurodiversity studies as a legitimate field of study, a graduate degree program here in America, and also the provision and development of a board certified neurodiversity consultant professional credential. Working on both of those. They should launch either later in 2026 or early 2027. We've got some kind of signature programs. We offer NeuroStage, which is a speaker and presentation series that features neurodivergent artists and storytellers and keynote speakers, and also a lot of cool programming that you can explore on our website, which is fishinatreeglobal.org. And so my work really focuses around neurodiversity justice here in the US and beyond globally. I am this year the voice of neurodiversity pride across the globe. I was the keynote speaker for Global Neurodiversity Pride Day and month for Neurodiversity Foundation, which is headquartered in the Netherlands, but they're a global operation. Very honored to work with them and to provide the keynote for that global event. And so a lot of my professional work has to do with advocacy and activism. Obviously, on a personal note, I am a writer. I have a Substack and I have a book in progress called The Trouble with Being Good, which is about the hidden lies of ADHD women. And it's a pretty interesting project. It's a research-based, memoir-based book. The process of writing it is fairly fascinating. I do all the research first for each chapter. Like as I go, I work on a chapter a week, and I put together all my notes and my research into one component of the chapter. And then I have a community circle group made up of ADHD women across the globe. And I present the research for that week's topic. And then I record their reactions and reflections and personal stories that are in line with that week's topic. And then that gets incorporated into the chapter. And then I write a really deep dive memoir-based reflection of my own about how all of this was true or not true in my own life. And then that kind of makes up rounds out each chapter. But what the really interesting thing is, I've been using Subspace as a container for these drafts of the chapters and drafts of the pieces and parts about the community circle meetings that we've been having and what people have been saying, and just kind of containing all of that in one space. And then, of course, people on Substack are interacting with that, and I'm collecting all of that information. And then I'm, also writing articles that are inspired by things that come up in the meetings and in the chapter. So it's a big container for all of this work that's kind of focused on the ADHD experience of femininity, which is just truly fascinating. We have a lot of also non-binary and trans people in the group who offer unique perspectives on femininity as well. So it's been a really incredible project. An interesting thing that's come out of it is I've been starting to take note of what is happening personally and professionally and politically as I'm writing the book. So there's like a chapter where I had a very ADHD day and I forgot to record the 4-hour session that we had, which was excellent. And I was riveted by every moment of it. And then I realized I had not recorded it. So later I had to hold a special session to try to recreate that, that whole thing again with like a new group of people. And then, and so things like that. And then like for 2 weeks, I was so burnt out, I couldn't work on anything or get out of bed. And so I kind of documented that. And then of course, politically, a lot has been coming out in the US relative to autism and some claims by the government and various movements that are interested in politics here in America. So it's really been influencing not just my writing, but also the group perspective on what we're talking about each week. So it's been a really fascinating experience.
Yeah, I love it because I resonate with so much of what you're saying in terms of these kind of cycles that we go through in terms of needing to take a break. And I was moderating one of the health equity panels. I collaborate with Umbrella ND, nonprofit org, that does a lot of advocacy work with neurodivergent adults. And I started collaborating with them back in May, I want to say, just building out panels where we talk about all kinds of different things. This time around, it was workplace health and advocacy. And I just had one of these moments yesterday where I was like, I'm going to take this moment. And it got super political too. And we really were talking about the Trump administration and the MAHA movement and all of that. And how, a lot of blaming and shaming and guilting is happening, unfortunately, for, autistic people at the center. And I just said, taking breaks should be a human right. And a lot of us are just not afforded that. You know, we don't have the privilege to take breaks, and you're just constantly moving on to the next thing. And so I love to hear you candidly say that, Bridget, that like, yeah, sometimes, you know, you're just kind of not consistent for a while. And in the same breath, I'm just so impressed by all of the social media content that you're able to build out. And it's so cool to see you building community. And for me, like, that's a huge service of community care that is taking place in the neurodivergent community. And specifically for ADHD women, just kind of seeing you build that audience and like regularly have an interesting, engaging poll. Like for me, that is awesome to see.
Yes,
that.
my polls are famous.
Yeah,
Famous across LinkedIn.
they're doing well. They really are. And I admire that as a content creator and someone who is very like experimental in that space. Like I also do a poll like every Wednesday, and I pat myself on the back when like I follow through on it. And that's been like, I've been doing that, I think, since like March of last year, something like that. I've lost track of the time at this point. But that consistency, right? And that's something that is tricky, I think, when you're first starting out as a founder of an organization. I think like for me, that has been a learning curve. And so I want to say, this is probably like way too much flattery, but I want to say that like you're an inspiration for me there. And all this work that you're talking about with the Substack and getting lots of feedback from folks as you're building out your book, I think that that is incredible as well, because it would be like horrible if you were just like, you know, I have a hunch that some of these things are resonant with other people, and you just kind of like went by your own life experience. Like, obviously that would be horrible. So it's amazing to see like that feedback loop. And when it comes to content creation, whether that, you know, is in the written form of a book, or whether that is, you know, posts that, you know, have a certain amount of text, a certain amount of images or video, like whatever that looks like, a podcast, wink, wink, like it's so good to get feedback and to know that like your messaging is resonating with your intended audiences. And I think that is such a tricky thing to do. I remember when I was writing my dissertation, for instance, my advisors would always say, oh, be careful about your tone, you know, and I didn't know, like I was autistic at that time. So I couldn't even self-advocate at that point and talk about why, you know, I was struggling with that in my writing. But it's so interesting at this point in hindsight to be like, actually, you know, like they weren't wrong, like in the sense that when you're putting yourself out there and you're showcasing your knowledge and you're basically opening up that platform for other people to express themselves if they've had similar experiences to you, you totally want to be mindful of, you know, who you're including in your reflections. And so I think like having that feedback loop and always doing content in a very collaborative way really resonates with me. And I think you're moving in the right direction there. And I'm super inspired by you for doing that. So yeah, we're kind of doing similar things, and it's so funny because I find that to be the case for a lot of ADHD women who are in leadership positions. I find that we have a lot in common. We kind of gravitate toward a lot of the same ideals and principles, mission and vision. And so for me, it's just like, I can't say it enough that I am like looking for role models as much as I possibly can at like 37. And it's also this reciprocal kind of relationship, right? Because I find a lot of people that I find to be role models, and then they find me to be a role model, right? And so I think we're just at this great moment in the United States and in the world to like highlight that relationship building, and what that looks like on and offline, and how that kind of flows from maybe somebody who's just like super great at being consistent and building an audience on social media platforms, but then moves that into their local community and moves that into a global community outside of one platform. And I just think the ability to do that is no small feat. And so as much as I can, I want to recognize that, and I want to breathe as much like life and like how do I say this, sustainability into that, because I think in the neurodivergent community, like a lot of us are on like various healing journeys, but then people forget too that like activism is a way that a lot of us heal, and advocacy is a way that a lot of us heal. So that was one of the reasons why I kind of reached out to you. And I just love, all of the ways that you are creating spaces for folks to get to a point of financial stability as well. And on this podcast, I talk about that a great deal. Like, what do partnerships look like for folks who have social enterprises or are, like building organizations that are looking for a positive impact. And so I'd love for you to maybe dive a little bit deeper into that. Like, why did you decide to make some changes in Fish in a Tree and start getting into, creating professional like certification programs for neurodivergent folks? Because there's a lot of interest in doing like consulting with businesses and like creating safe working environments, and like there's a ton of interest in the neurodivergent community for doing that kind of work, and also like there are tons of folks like in education spaces that are trying to reform instructional design practices, and like then you can talk about like the healthcare system and the justice system. Like there are people kind of everywhere like working in their own way as consultants to do reform. So how did you decide to move in that direction? And what do you see happening in like maybe the next 5 years? Like how many people do you think will sign up for those programs and will get certified and will be like out there doing the work?
Okay, so I just want to point out that you asked me like 11 questions.
Didn't, I'm sorry.
So I will try to address as many of those as I can remember in order as possible. Yeah, so the pivot for Fish in a Tree was very important to us. And it was more of a becoming of what we always intended to be, rather than like a complete reimagination of what we were. So Fish in a Tree, like I said, we were originally conceived as a neurodiversity community center locally here in New Orleans. And we expanded to offering programming and services online to better serve neurodivergent people in our communities. And because those things were online, it opened us up for national and then eventually global reach. And then we ended up at a point only offering programming and services online, just to support our own staff and their efforts and their sustainability of their efforts as well. So we were doing that, and a lot of that programming I was leading myself, and the work was amazing, very transformative. We had like the most incredible participants who really communicated to us that we were making a difference in their life and that they were coming to understand themselves with a whole new understanding and a whole new language to describe their internal and external experiences of the world, and to better be able to talk with others about those things, be it in healthcare settings or within their own families, or in academic settings, et cetera, professional settings, et cetera. But it became clear over the first couple of years, excuse me, that we were only ever going to be able to serve as many people directly, as we had the resources and manpower to do so. And it also became, at the same time, it became clear that we could serve everyone. We could serve the whole world. But the truth was that people were being harmed by the systems in which they live their daily lives, by the education system, by all governmental systems, by housing, by the justice system, et cetera. Every place that they had to interact with publicly, the workplace, et cetera, was actively harming them. And we couldn't undo the harm that was happening to them in the past, present, or future, other than giving them new language to understand those experiences and to be able to talk about them and process them, which are all good things and very necessary. But it came to really pass that we began to understand that because there were no foundations in neurodiversity education as a field, that there was no foundation to build credentialing programs or any kind of true autistic or neurodivergent led programming or services for people, because there was no certification body to do that. And there was also no gold standard of how do we educate people about what neurodiversity studies is, and what the neurodiversity paradigm is, and what the neurodiversity movement and the neurodiversity justice movement stand for. There were many siloed efforts, individual and group efforts across the country and across the globe to identify and address neurodiversity in healthcare, neurodiversity in the justice system. And there were wonderful efforts, and they're truly doing good work, but they were all siloed in little pockets all over the place, and none of them were working together, and nobody was on the same page about what any of this meant. And so we decided that we would be the collective agency, the hub that would unite all of these efforts, and that we would set the stage for neurodiversity as an academic field, to legitimize neurodiversity as an academic field, a field of research, by establishing neurodiversity studies as a graduate level program degree offering. And also to convene a board of experts to be able to certify neurodiversity consultants, to educate them collectively as a cohort, and to certify them as professionals in the neurodiversity field. That was very important to us. so that there was a standard for what we meant when we said neurodiversity consultant, and there was a standard of education about what you can offer as a consultant, what you can be educated about as a consultant, and what you can really do with your clients. And so those two kind of founding initiatives, were central to the relaunch of Fishnetry as Center for Neurodiversity Education, Advocacy, and Activism. And we're hoping to launch the practical application of those initiatives very soon. We're in talks with a lot of universities across the country. We have multiple corporate and nonprofit partners, educational partners, curriculum developers across the globe working on this. So, and it's been done before. I mean, neurodiversity studies is an academic field and credential in other countries. Right. It's just not here in the US. So I'd love to say that we're so groundbreaking that we figured all this out on our own. But I'd still say we're groundbreaking, but it's something that exists, not a lot, but a little bit in other countries. The one offering in academics that's available in the US is a continuing education credit you can get, I believe it's at Harvard, for neurodiversity studies. And so we're just trying to expand that, and we are working from people with Yale, with Harvard, to really build out the curriculum of these degree programs. And we're not sure under what institution we're going to house this yet. We're still in talks. So it's all moving forward. We've just written several grants, waiting to hear back about the funding of these adventures that were going on. Yeah. And then as far as the professional credential, I mean, just like any other professional field, there needs to be a accrediting body that sets the standard for the profession. And we hope to not stop at the neurodiversity consultant credential. We hope to continue offering continuing education units to consultants, just like you would in social work and other fields, but also to expand what the certifying body can do and credential you professionally as in the field of neurodiversity consulting and coaching, et cetera. There are a lot of neurodivergent people who are and have experienced financial insecurity due to multiple factors, some of which relate to their neurodivergent selves. And so we want to really shore up the financial viability of neurodivergent entrepreneurship and neurodivergent professions within organizations and corporations. And, just really establish the legitimacy of people with lived experience as experts. And so that's become very important to us. And the thing is that this stuff doesn't exist in this country, and it doesn't exist in many countries. There's little pockets of things here and there, but no one's really, laying a solid foundation for these things really anywhere. And so we're trying to do that. And, in the process, trying to fight ableism where we encounter it, and where, systems were built to exclude us. We're trying to address those issues through these efforts. So it's personally, a goal of mine to address these things and to provide these things to our community. But I think organizationally, like we bring together experts and leaders in various fields across the country and across the globe to address these issues, and to use what we're doing here in the US as a global model for the establishment of neurodiversity as a legitimate field, across the world. So it's a really big project, but we're super enthusiastic about it, and we try to live sustainably so that we can continue the work and get the job done. But yeah, just all in all, very exciting and very important work.
Yeah, I want to glaze you again, because I do feel like a lot of people talk about doing systemic change and they talk about transformational leadership, and they talk about, what they would like their positive impact to be. And it's hard sometimes to actually get together with several partners, kind of get everyone in the room and then pool resources and knowledge sets to really do something that's going to be, concrete, and then like something that can be measured in the future in terms of, how many universities will, offer a graduate program in neurodiversity studies, how many professionals will then, graduate with a certification to showcase, that they didn't just kind of come up with these ideas on their own, but they did it in community and unity with other people with very similar life experiences. And so I want to praise you for actually, kind of coming up with a really strong, viable strategy for systemic change in a lot of different sectors, whether that, is in corporate spaces, whether that's in education, whether that's in healthcare, whether that is in the justice system, because really none of us should be in silos. Like, we should all be, helping each other with common goals. But I think the practicality sometimes gets lost on folks that, are, let's face it, like healing from a lot of pushback and a lot of ableism, as you mentioned. So I can't give you enough praise for the work that you're doing. And I guess, with that being said, kind of talking about the pushback that we're experiencing currently in the United States, and just, a lot of the ableist practices and things that we're seeing, in the mass media, and also, we come face to face with quite a bit of it. I'll say, like, even in the grant writing community, I find myself saying, what sort of words should I use? Like, should I use the word neurodivergent? Should I use neurodiversity? Should I use disability? Should, and it's such an interesting thing, because I find myself saying, I've got to do a lot of healing on my own. It's like, when you're in these spaces, you have to remember that there are trauma triggers. And I was reading an article for one of the grants that I was writing about recently, and it was like a New York Times article, and it was from 2019, and they were talking about how in high income communities, the students have 504 plans, and at much higher rates, like 18 to 30% of all students in these communities have 504 plans, but then low income communities, only, like less than 1% have access to 504 plans. And then, just for the audience to know a little bit more, 504 plans are basically the guidelines for accommodations for students and who are neurodivergent or disabled, or both. And I think that for me, coming from a low income background, I didn't realize that I was part of that story. And I felt like, oh my gosh, I didn't think this was going to be a trauma trigger, but it really kind of was. Like, I had this feeling of, wow, this is a really heavy injustice. And now I have to sort of write about this. From my grant writer role, I have to talk about why this is relevant for education reform. And, I was working with an ed tech tool. It's kind of more of an accessibility tool for students. And I had to write about, that whole scenario because that was one of the, target audiences and target consumer markets for this particular tool. And so kind of coming back around, like kind of full circle, when you're sort of getting this pushback from, ableist policies, how do you, sustain like positive, emotional outlook on the world? Because I feel like a lot of us get caught up in the trauma of the work that we're doing, and it is hard to kind of bounce back and keep yourself grounded and keep yourself moving, especially in such a charged political environment. So like, how do you navigate that, Bridget, when you're experiencing a lot of pushback from ableist policies? How do you, center and ground yourself to move forward?
Yeah, so, as the national and global leader of a justice movement, I get a lot of death threats and violent messages and daily. And I have to sit through that stuff, and some of them you have to keep in case something happens, and some of them you can get rid of. And that's part of my daily life. But the thing is, if that's happening, it's because what you're doing is working. And that's how, that's what gets me, through that whole daily process of having to weed that stuff out. The reason that we're seeing the political pushback that we are today is because so many people started understanding themselves recently because of the better awareness and access that we have to assessment, and better created assessments that are more culturally informed, gender informed, et cetera. And we started realizing that there were so many misdiagnosed and undiagnosed autistic people who were women and members of minority groups and LGBTQI+ community members, et cetera. That's why all this is happening. It's because people started understanding themselves in a new way, and then wondering why the world, didn't serve them. It's a challenge to the existing systems when your people start realizing, this isn't really serving me, and they start to wonder who it does serve, right?
Right.
So it's because it's working. It is the truth, and also has to be your daily inspiration to drive forward.
I 100% agree, and I don't know if I said this before, but I want to like reiterate it as many times as I possibly can. That a lot of us that are working in restorative justice spaces, whether that is, about accessibility, whether that is like doing some sort of design justice or advocacy work, I feel that the work itself, the service itself, is in a way healing. So it's kind of like you do have these moments, right, where you're like, wow, this is really, really overwhelming. The pushback that I'm getting, all of this negativity that is coming toward me for speaking out and for creating awareness and creating solutions and creating partnerships, right? That like people don't want us to organize, right? And they don't want us to have a voice, and like that is, if you can use fear to silence people, it's very, very effective. And that's something that we're seeing all over the place in our country right now. And so I think that when you do the opposite of that, when you organize and you let your intuition, what's worked for you in your life experience, and you you let your heart or your faith or hope, whatever you want to call it, when you let that kind of take over, it does allow for these healing cycles as well, right? As much as the pushback causes damage, it can also reinvigorate you at the same time. And I love the way that you described it. I love the way that you said that it's because it's working, right? And I think that anytime you're doing any sort of activist work, and I feel that a lot of people who are social enterprise founders, a lot of them are doing activist work. You know, they might be like shy to say that that's what they're doing. But if you're doing any sort of transformational work and you're setting the groundwork or a model for, you know, how to do business differently, you know, how to run nonprofit organizations differently, if you have some sort of outside the box leadership strategy that is inclusive and is, you know, setting the groundwork for people to be able to express themselves authentically, like you're an activist, you know. And so I think it's critical in spaces like this for us to kind of get down to the basics of what motivates us, what keeps us moving forward. Because from the outside, it probably seems very daunting, and it probably seems like, oh my goodness, you know, what a moment to be doing the work that you're doing. But I want to tell everybody out there that, like, that's what fuels us to keep going in a lot of ways. Like, it's almost as if we realize that the reason for all of the resistance and the tension is because major change is coming, right? Those are the signs, right? And I guess what I have seen, like within the last year of my work, in terms of the healing that's taken place, is I've seen a lot of women really come together no matter what field they're in terms of professional fields. I've seen them come together and mentor each other in really, you know, authentic ways. And I felt the tension when I started Neurodivergent Women Leaders Creative Mentorship and Support. That group on LinkedIn, a couple of women reached out to me and said they were scared to say that they were neurodivergent. And I think that there is still a certain amount of fear that's taking place. But at the same time, a lot of folks are healing because they see a community that they didn't realize existed. And so I guess, how did you kind of like originally think about how to build partnership in the neurodivergent community? I guess that is kind of a very broad question, but I guess from your positionality as a woman and like also as an ADHDer, like what made you say, not only do I want to do activism in the neurodivergent community, but like I want to build partnership and community with folks that have very similar intersectional life experiences to me?
Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit of my life history. You know, I grew up in a nuclear family. I had two parents and no siblings. And I was, obviously an ADHD child. And my parents were harsh, and critical. And, but also there was this storyline that we were a loving family, and that we were, other kids' parents were divorcing, and my parents loved each other so much, and they would never divorce, and and that we were really happy, and we had little songs that we would make up about things, and we were just like a really happy family. But the undercurrent of that was that, I wasn't. I was constantly criticized. I was constantly made fun of within my own family circle, the three of us. I was the extra person in the relationship. My parents were very into each other and not so into me. I was the constant scapegoat and cause of every problem in our family life. I was the oh my God, what'd you do now kind of situation. My whole life growing up in that family. And some of it was just kind of a drag, but some of it was really hurtful and really quite traumatic. Without going too much into it, I go a lot deeper in the book, obviously, about the experience, but some of it was really hard to live through. I had a couple of suicide attempts, and my parents, didn't come to get me from the hospital, right? I went home with friends' parents and things where they would take care of me and eventually send me back home. And, they weren't there for me in any sense of ever being there for anyone. Not only through my childhood, but in my adult life as well. They weren't there for me when things would go down. More recently, I was in an psychologically abusive marriage for over a decade. And I knew it within the first few days of being married, and I communicated it to my mom, and I was like, I don't think this is going to work out. And she was like, oh, no, like you're married now. And I was like, oh, okay. So I stayed married to this person for, over 10 years. And who has since gone to therapy and resolved some things within himself. And we're friendlier to each other now. We raised a child together, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, when we were getting divorced, I was devastated, and my parents, he did a lot of things that were not good. But my parents, they weren't there for me. They were there for him. They supported him emotionally and financially and in every way you can support a person. And I didn't hear from them for a year while all that was happening, so they were definitely not there for me when I needed them, And a big part of all of that was I was diagnosed as ADHD, and immediately my mother and father, but my memory is mostly my mother, were like, this is a secret. This is a horrible, horrible, shameful family secret, and you can't tell anyone. You can't tell your friends. You can't tell anyone else in our family. You can't tell, a therapist. You can't tell a priest. That's all you, and that is so shameful. And don't ever mention it ever again. And certainly don't ask your school for help or accommodations. That was just like beyond the beyond. And definitely when you start working, don't ever disclose that to a workplace. I mean, I remember these conversations as a small child, my mother saying, like, you can't ever tell an employer that you're ADHD, and she was very serious about it. And it became this very shameful secret that I had to carry. And, and because of that, and I was, of course, autistic and didn't know it. And I felt very other from not only people in my immediate family, but from everyone. I felt very other and very different and very alone and very confused, as a small child and all through my life growing up. And I never felt part of anything, or never felt part of a group, any kind of group, and certainly not my own family. And, I had no language for any of that, and I certainly had no community. And I was scared to even go on the internet and type in ADHD to see if there were other people who were ADHD. Like, I was scared. I was scared to say the words out loud and to put them in writing. And so I had no idea how many other people were ADHD or even really what ADHD meant, right? No one was teaching me what that meant or anything about it. So it wasn't until later as an adult, I guess it was when I was in graduate school, that I was like, I'm struggling, and I just kind of started on this journey of like, this is a part of who I am, and I'm going to learn about it, right? And I did it privately for, a while, learning about it. And it wasn't, until several years later that I said it out loud to another person who immediately was like, "Oh yeah, me too."
Yeah.
And once I started meeting other people that were also ADHD, and they didn't see it as a shameful secret, that kind of started opening some thoughts and some possibilities for me. And then through working as an adult in certain situations and organizations, I came to realize that I was also autistic, and learning kind of what that meant and the language of that. And I kind of realized just kind of one day, on that journey that that I was autistic for, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that there were other autistic and ADHD people out there that I could connect with and have a relationship with, and that none of this would ever be acceptable to my parents. And I made a choice that day that in order to be free, that I would need to end my relationship with my parents and find community with other autistic and ADHD people, and to be vocal about my own ADHD self, and to engage others to be as well. And, and it wasn't all in one fell swoop, but that's what happened. And that's what opened my world up exponentially. I ended my marriage. I ended my relationship with my parents. I moved to New Orleans, which is where I had always wanted to live. I met my partner, the love of my life. We got married. We blended our families. I now have 3 children. Our ex-spouses, who have done a lot of healing on their own, also moved to be close to us. So we're all here together in New Orleans, raising our kids together. And we founded Fishnetry. And we built the communities that, we didn't have.
Yeah.
And we were open about ourselves and our lives and our lived experience so that other people could be, because I don't ever want anyone to live with this idea that the essence of who they are is shameful.
Yeah, it's so refreshing. It's so refreshing to hear that journey. I've talked with so many women who are late identified and late diagnosed ADHD, and it's just shocking to see how many have been in abusive relationships and like realizing that getting in touch with that identity has opened a lot of doors for healing. And I think that I can imagine coming to similar conclusions in the sense of realizing all of the trauma responses that I had created to cope with being unidentified and undiagnosed. And just, I'll give a huge example to that would be like fawning, people pleasing, that kind of thing connected with perfectionism. All of that I didn't realize that was connected to ADHD. I had no idea that was connected. I didn't have therapists that were neuroaffirming. So I had to make those connections myself. I had to find community that had similar experiences to me to make sense of that in my life, and then kind of figure out, how to pivot, how to shift gears, how to find, healthier coping mechanisms. And so I think when you talk about your life experience and you talk about how healing it is and how it's given you a lot of purpose for your work, it's just, like I said, it's super refreshing and it resonates with me quite a bit. And I also think about lots of other women who I've met who have had similar life experiences. And I think the best thing to do to keep, ourselves on this, uplifted healing journey is just to keep reiterating that there's light at the end of these processes. If you are having to leave a relationship, or if you're having to transition into another field, or, if you're going through some huge life changes, like, it's going to be okay on the other end. I think it's really important for us to kind of keep that level of support up, because I think it can be totally overwhelming, especially when you're sort of in the moment and you just, either done a self identity process, or if you, have gone to professionals and gotten a diagnosis. Either way, it's still this moment. And a lot of people talk about going through a grief cycle when that happens. And so I want to say that it gets better. I want to say that I have like zero regrets for taking that deep research dive to learn more about myself, even if it happened like in my mid 30s, it happens for folks in their 40s, it happens 50s, 60s. And, it's okay to go through a lot of different emotions as you are finding yourself. It is a human response. And, you got to give yourself that self-compassion and grace. And I think people, sometimes want to shy away from talking about the emotional turmoil. But I think it is really important to say you're not alone in that. And honestly, like, every single time I hear one of those stories, Bridget, I'm relieved, I'm refreshed, and I'm like reinvigorated to continue to do activist work, right? And so I think that we're at a point where I want to maybe just ask you like one final question, and then we can kind of wrap things up, because I want us to be able to take a break. And I'm constantly reminding myself that. But I guess my last question for you is what would you say to other neurodivergent women who are founding social enterprises, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit? They see themselves as transformational leaders. Like, what would you say to them if they're like kind of beginning that journey and they're not sure what they're going to encounter, and you know, might be a little bit scary? Like, what should they hope for in the beginning of that journey? And also, like, maybe what they should look out for as well.
Again, people usually pay me thousands of dollars to answer that question. That's a whole mentorship journey, you know, like that's like a year-long mentorship journey to answer that question. I don't know how to begin to answer that question in like 5 minutes. You know, transformational leadership is tough. You know, it's not for everybody. You know, I wouldn't advise, you know, anybody to just do it. I mean, you need to have a support system, a good support system that is reliable and that will support you in good days and in bad days, because you will have bad days. You need to be fully on a journey where you have learned to take care of yourself, to take care of yourself and to rest as resistance, so that you can continue to do your work. And you have to fight productivity culture in order to do that, which is, you know, taught to you and ingrained in you for the lifetime up until today, and is a constant social pressure. So you have to actively, you know, build those things before you can even begin to be an effective leader, you know, in any case. But you also have to be very selective about what it is that you do. You have to really understand what your mission is, and you have to be true to it. There is a lot of I do mentor a lot of young ADHD professionals who are working in these spaces and believe that they want to do advocacy and activism work. And you have to have a really clear understanding about what it is that you want to accomplish, and you have to be able to say no to things that don't further that goal. And you have to understand, you know, that just because you say no to it doesn't mean that no one else will do it. And you have to trust that other qualified people will do that work in your absence. You can't do everything, and that's the quickest way to burnout and to an unsustainable life and career as an advocate and activist. So that's where I would start with all of that.
I love it. Yeah, I think that was super short and succinct. Gave folks some takeaways without going into a really deep dive, because that's for when you are consulting with them, right? So I want to close out our episode. I do feel like we went there on a lot of different topics, and it's, you know, healing every time I do one of these episodes, and I learned so much along the way. I'm hoping that you learned a lot from me as well. I love when things like that are reciprocal. So what I'm going to do is in the comments and the show notes, I am going to put Bridget Hamseed's contact information, the website for Fish in a Tree, and your Substack, and like all of the different projects that you're working on, any services that you're offering, so that the audience can stay in touch with you and collaborate with you in, you know, any way that is going to further your mission and vision. And I want to thank you for coming on to talk with me today on Bird's Eye Impact, where positive ideas take flight.
Thank you so much, LaToya. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.